Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving into one of the absolute most fascinating business transformations of the 21st century. Seriously, it starts off as your classic ultimate David versus Goliath story, a super scrappy startup taking on this massive entrenched global industry. But as we start to unpack the history and the data today, it actually turns into something way more surprising. It becomes a tale of two entirely different industries slowly morphing into one another. If you've ever wanted to understand how modern disruption actually works in the real world and where the whole future of travel is heading, well, this is exactly what you need to know.
Okay, let's take a quick look at our roadmap for today. We're going to kick things off with From Mattresses to Millions. Then we'll look at the asset-light revolution, followed by surviving the global shutdown. Next up is the cost of scaling, and we'll wrap it all up with a changing battlefield.
All right, part one, From Mattresses to Millions.
Picture this. It's 2007. Travel was absolutely booming, international arrivals were inching close to 1 billion, and traditional hotels were the undisputed, unshakable kings of the industry. But over in San Francisco, two designers, Brian Chesky and Joe Gebbia, were literally struggling to pay their rent. Hotels happened to be completely booked out for a local design conference, so they had this crazy idea to inflate 3 air mattresses in their living room and charge $80 a night. Which really brings up a pivotal question, right? How many people actually want to sleep in a stranger's living room? I mean, it sounds like a totally desperate idea. And honestly, that exact doubt is what completely blinded early investors to the massive potential of what they were actually building.
Because those early days, they were just ridiculously gritty. They launched the initial airbeds in late 2007, built a rudimentary site, and officially launched at the South by Southwest Festival in March 2008. And they got a grand total of 2 bookings. And actually, one of those was Brian himself. They were absolutely drowning in credit card debt. So out of sheer total desperation, they created and sold these political-themed cereal boxes, Obama O's and Captain McCain's, during the 2008 election. Yeah, they basically funded a future tech empire by slinging breakfast cereal. But it worked. They scraped together $30,000. And that pure, stubborn tenacity is exactly what convinced Paul Graham to finally give them a shot and accept them into the Y Combinator Accelerator in January 2009.
What you really need to take away from this is how incredibly easy it is to overlook a massive opportunity. 7. Just let that number sink in for a second. That is the number of prominent Silicon Valley investors who either flat out rejected or just totally ignored the founders in 2008. The guys were asking for just $150,000 in exchange for 10% of the company, which implies a valuation of just $1.5 million. But those investors fundamentally misunderstood the future market size. They confused the initial quirky use case, the air mattresses, with the eventual scale of a global platform.
Moving right along to Section 2, the asset-light revolution.
So why on earth did the massive hotel giants ignore them for so long? Well, it really comes down to this concept of disruptive innovation. This is when a new competitor enters the market by serving ignored, low-end customers with a cheaper, sometimes imperfect product. Then, over time, they slowly improve and capture the whole mainstream market. The hotels were acting totally rationally. They were focused on their highly profitable premium and business clients. They looked at these couch-surfing college kids with tight budgets and assumed, okay, well, that's the ceiling. They thought the product was the physical mattress. They didn't realize the product was the network itself.
The fundamental difference in how these two business models operate is just wild. Think about the traditional hotel model. You have to buy prime land, secure massive financing, construct a huge building, hire a ton of staff, and take on all this immense capital and operational risk. Airbnb, on the other hand, utilized the asset-light model. They simply built the software platform, centralized the payments and the trust systems, and let the individual hosts take on all the physical risk of property ownership and maintenance. Basically, Airbnb completely separated the control of the platform from the ownership of the real estate. To really put this into perspective, just look at the supply growth over a 10-month period starting in July 2018. Marriott, literally the largest hotel chain in the world, added an impressive 46,000 rooms. But because Airbnb doesn't have to pour a single ounce of concrete or hire construction crews to add a room, they added 1 million listings in that exact same time frame. 1 million. It perfectly contrasts the massive, heavy physical effort of traditional hospitality against the almost frictionless exponential digital growth of a two-sided marketplace.
Which brings us to Section 3, Surviving the Global Shutdown. We all remember 2020, right? The data from the travel collapse is absolutely staggering. International arrivals dropped by 74%. Over 1 billion travelers just vanished overnight. Here in the US, average hotel occupancy plummeted to 44%. But here is the absolute killer for traditional hotels. Even when your rooms are completely empty, your fixed costs, the massive mortgages on the buildings, your core administrative staff, the maintenance, all of that remains. You still have to pay the bills. Now, Airbnb was hit incredibly hard too, reporting a massive $4.6 billion operating loss. But their asset-light model was fundamentally much more elastic.
Because they didn't actually own the buildings, Airbnb was able to rapidly intercept entirely new travel behaviors. People stopped flying internationally for sure, but they still desperately wanted to escape their primary cramped apartments. So travel shifted to local drive-to destinations. Then, the whole work-from-anywhere phenomenon exploded, creating this huge, sudden demand for whole homes with fast Wi-Fi and full kitchens. Get this, by the third quarter of 2021, stays of 28 days or longer made up 20% of all Airbnb bookings. Their flexible inventory let them instantly pivot and cater to remote workers and long-term relocations in a way that a standard 300-square-foot hotel room simply couldn't.
And Wall Street's reaction to that agility? Astounding. In December 2020, literally still in the absolute depths of the pandemic crisis, Airbnb went public. The market rewarded their elasticity massively, valuing Airbnb at an incredible $100 billion. That was more than legacy hotel titans Marriott and Hilton combined. The market was basically waving a giant flag, signaling that the very nature of travel had permanently shifted.
All right, moving into Section 4, the cost of scaling. So jumping ahead to 2025, Airbnb reaches over 9 million active listings globally. But you can't hit that kind of massive, unprecedented scale without causing some serious socioeconomic friction. You see, unlike a hotel that gets built in a specifically zoned commercial area, Airbnb utilizes existing residential housing. If you live in a popular tourist city, you have probably felt this firsthand when looking for a place to live. In the short term, a city's housing supply is relatively fixed. For example, an independent study looking at highly exposed areas of Barcelona showed a 7% increase in local rents and a 17% increase in home sale prices. It's a simple, undeniable economic cause and effect. When you take homes away from local residents and offer them to short-term tourists, local housing becomes more scarce and prices naturally go up. And because of this very real impact on daily life, local governments worldwide have basically decided the platform is just too big to remain unregulated. Just look at the pushback. In New York, as of 2023, hosts pretty much have to be present during the stay, which effectively bans entire home short-term rentals. Over in Paris, they're tightening their annual rental cap down to just 90 days for 2025. Barcelona is taking the most extreme step of all. They are planning to not renew any of their over 10,000 tourist apartment licenses by 2028. Done. And the entire European Union is rolling out strict data sharing and registration mandates by 2026. The era of unchecked, frictionless hypergrowth, yeah, that is absolutely over.
Which perfectly sets up our final section, Part 5, a changing battlefield.
This mounting regulatory ceiling is leading to what a lot of people online are calling the Airbnbust. Now, to be clear, it doesn't mean the company itself is failing, far from it, but it really highlights extreme friction in the current market. Check out the numbers from 2023. The U.S. supply of short-term rentals grew by 12.6%, completely outpacing traveler demand, which only grew by 6.5%. This simply means you have way more hosts actively fighting for fewer bookings. Combine that highly competitive dynamic with rising local compliance costs and tweaks to platform fees, and individual host profits are really starting to shrink. The platform as a whole continues to operate at a massive, incredibly profitable scale, but for your average individual property owner, it is a much, much tighter squeeze these days.
And that leads to the ultimate irony of this whole crazy story, a total market convergence. The disruptor and the disruptor are now openly, aggressively copying each other's core strengths just to survive. Hotels are starting to act a lot like Airbnb. Marriott, for instance, launched Homes and Villas specifically to capture that lucrative long-stay whole home market. Meanwhile, Airbnb is acting much more like a traditional hotel. They're pushing super hard for uniform quality standards, transparent upfront pricing, and immediate reliability. Why? Because they know that inconsistent, frustrating guest experiences drive customers right back to the predictable front desk of a traditional hotel. They're basically copying each other's homework.
The lines between our residential homes and our commercial hotels have completely blurred. Hotels have had to painfully adapt to a world where literally anyone's spare bedroom is a direct competitor. And Airbnb has had to accept that without strict quality control and government regulation, it just cannot sustain its empire.
So I'll leave you with this provocative thought as we wrap up this explainer. With tech platforms acting more like hotels and legacy hotels acting more like tech platforms, who do you think actually wins this new hospitality war? Is it the massive corporations, the everyday hosts, or ultimately us, the travelers? Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. And as always, keep questioning the world around you.